Good morning, everyone. Um, so we are going to be continuing with study unit one. For those who are joining us for the first time, please note that uh, please make sure that after the class, after 5 today, send us through your details so that we can link you so that you're able to access the material. Because on our website, you are able to access the articles, which are already highlighted with a bit of notes on them. Even if you are on the trial package, you are able to access the material. And you are also able to access the videos of that we did last year to prepare for the coming classes. You are also able to access the on every Monday after every class. We also upload videos of what we have done on the Saturday following the class as well. So which means that uh, for those who are joining us, even if you're on the trial package as well, please ensure to create a user account on our website and then communicate with us to let us know which modules you want us to link to the profile that you've created. Because remember, it's not enough to just create a profile. Your profile need to be linked on our side as well from the back end. So which means that we need to know which modules you would want us to link you as well on the trial package if you're joining on the trial package or if you are registering as well. So please take note of this. So in the previous class, we went through learning units 1.1 to 1.5. So that's what we covered in the previous class. Our agenda today is to go through learning units 1.6 as well as 2.1. So that's what we need to cover in today's class. Then I think we're also going to have we know that registration is ending end of March, which is on the 31st of March. So there are some students who are still registering last minute as well. So we are going to allow students to have one free class before they have to register. So we are going to allow students to have one more free class after Easter before they have to register as well. So please keep that in mind. And also, most importantly, for you to benefit from these classes as well, make sure that you create a user account and we link you so that you're able to access the material so that when we're in class, as we go through the curriculum, you will be in a position where you know exactly, you're able to follow what we're discussing, although I will be highlighting the material on the screen as well. But for you, if you want to be able to also follow as well, you should be able to have the material with you, and we are giving you that material, which is already highlighted with a bit of notes on it as well. So in the previous class, we did cover unit 1.1 to 1.5. On that material, the most important thing that you need to take note of is unit 1.5, because from unit 1.5, this is where they usually ask a lot of theory questions coming from unit 1.5. And remember, usually the questions from unit 1.5, you can either find them in question number 1 of your exam, where, remember, question number 1 of your exam is short questions. So material coming from 1.5, usually you can expect to encounter it in short questions, or you can also expect to encounter the material coming from long questions as well. Maybe it can be a 10-mark question or a 15-mark question as well, where they can give you, for example, a case study, and based on the case study, they ask you to identify and discuss the 5 risk management failures from that case study. Or they can ask you to, in general, they can also ask you to state and discuss the 5 risk management failures. So those are the different ways that they can ask you material coming from unit 1.5. And then they can also ask you from unit 1.5, they can also ask you questions to do with the responsibilities of the risk manager. And then they can also ask questions to do with the responsibilities of the board and top management. Because remember, we know that the job of if you look at the responsibilities of the risk manager that we covered in into 1.5, They need to identify and quantify the risk and then present the risk to the board and top management. Then it is the responsibility of the board and top management to decide, based on the presentation and the information that they are given, how much risk the organization should expose itself to based on the relationship between risk and return. Remember, risk and return are objectives that the organization are going to be faced with as well. They're constraining each other. So which means in that case, the responsibility of the board and top management is to decide how much risk exposure should the organization expose itself to in pursuit of returns, because there is always a balancing act that you have to keep in mind when it comes to risk and return. Because generally, the higher risk you take, the higher the expected return as well. So there's always going to be that relationship. So which means from unit 1.5, the responsibilities of the risk manager, the responsibilities of the board and top management, and also being able to state and discuss these 5 risk management failures. They can also give you a case study, and then from the case study, they ask you to state and discuss the 5 risk management failures as well. So those are the typical questions you would expect to encounter. And remember, we did cover this in the previous class when we did unit 1.1 to unit 1.5. So today, we are now going to be looking at unit 1.6. Now, before we look at unit 1.6, are there any questions? Now, from unit 1.6, the heading of the article is "What a Difference a Word Makes. Understanding Threats to Performance in a VUCA World," right? So which means, in this case, when you look at those understanding threats to performance in a VUCA world, what we are trying to cover here is that so originally the terminology, the acronym VUCA originated from situations where in a battlefield at war, the army generals are having to make decisions, right? And as they're having to make decisions as well in a battle, remember back in the days, wars used to be close combat wars, right? We're not necessarily where you're now seeing people bombing each other with ballistic weapons and all those kind of things as well. Usually, if you look at historically, wars were characterized by battles where there's close combat. And if as there's close combat as well, and if you look at the type of weapons that were used back in the days as well, it's usually, if you look at historically in Europe and also in America as well, you'll find that it was usually those guns that were every time after you shoot, they create a smoke as well, where there's a lot of smoke. So which means when there's a lot of people in the battlefield and people are shooting each other as well, maybe they are also using cannons as well. There's a smoke that is basically engulfing the whole battlefield. And in the middle of all that chaos, in the middle of all that smoke as well, you now expect the army general to be making decisions. So as they are making decisions there, it basically meant that there are certain variables that they also have to make sure that they also overcome. And these variables are basically constituted and described as situations which are volatile, where there's uncertainty, where there's complexity, and also where there is ambiguity as well. So those are the situations that the army generals were facing in the battlefield. Now, this acronym was now taken into the context of modern management of businesses and organizations as well. So you'll find that because of the advancements of technology, you find that back in the days, it was easy to make decisions when it comes to, or it was easier to make decisions for your business when you're running a business. Let's say, for example, you're running a business in the rural area. So which basically meant that you already know who your who your market is. You already know who your competitors are. And which basically means that those are the people that you were, or those are the organizations, or the companies, or the, if it's a tuck shop, those are the tuck shops that you're looking at competing with as well. But now, when we look at the advancements in technology and also the the internet as well, we see that the organizations are now, or are now having to, are no longer just affected by what's happening in their own small little community or their small region. Businesses are now being affected by what is happening across the world as well. We have seen this quite a lot, even if you look at in recent history. We know that in 2007, whatever happened in America, where there was that recession as well. Yes, bad decisions were made there when it comes to the issue of mortgage loans that were being given out to parties that necessarily did not qualify for those home loans as well. And then they were repackaged and sold to other people, other investors across the world. And guess what? You, as a small business in South Africa, you also ended up being affected by those decisions as well. And we have seen this as well when you look at the issue of the coronavirus as well, where no one really knows, no one can know, okay, there's always contention on exactly where it originated, but the issue is whatever happened there also ended up affecting us in Africa or South Africa as well, which means that which basically means that as we are becoming a global community, whatever decisions are made there, they're also coming in to affect our organizations. And then we see it now, what is happening in real life. We know that that issue of the USA and Israel are going to war with Iran as well. And now they're talking about the Strait of Hormuz being choked, where Iran is saying we are closing that strait. And because of that, we see that the oil prices are already beginning to go up as well. And there's also other commodities that are also, the prices are also beginning to go up as well. And remember, we know that oil, for businesses, oil is also used for, remember, this is where the fuel for trucks, this is where the fuel for vehicles as well, diesel and petrol, comes from, which means that when the oil price goes up, the price of diesel and petrol is also expected to go up, which means that the cost of business is also going to go up as well. And because of this, we would expect a ripple effect where even the price of some of some commodities is also expected to go up as well. So which means, regardless of what is happening there, we are also now becoming affected in South Africa as well. So which means, because of this, it means that in the midst of all operating in this global community that we're operating in as well, this is basically this is the smoke that we're operating in. And because of this as well, there is a lot of variables that the management has to take into account when they are making decisions. So which means, because of this, this is where the acronym VUCA is becoming more and more important for one to be able to understand, so that they are also able to make decisions in the midst of all this chaos that is happening, in the midst of a world where there's a lot of volatility, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of complexity in decision making, and there's also a lot of ambiguity as well in in the operations that that we are operating. Because remember, there's no longer that sure case to say this is going to end up causing this to happen as well. So there's a lot of ambiguity, so which means that decision making is now being made where it's no longer that clear on exactly what the cause and effect relationships are as well. So this is where the acronym VOCA emanates from. So if you look at the global community now, and we're operating in a global community, it means that even if you look at what is happening now, it also means that the price, remember now they're talking about the shipping routes moving, where now some companies, because of the Strait of Hormuz is being choked, it means that some companies are now having to go as far down as the Cape of Good Hope and then navigating going to Asia as well, which means that the cost of doing business is also increasing as well. And because of this, well, that's why you see that in the next few months, if this persists as well, there's going to be an increase in a lot of prices for many goods and services as well. So with that in mind, when we look at the article, the heading of the article is what difference a word makes. Understanding threats to performance in a VUCA world. So which means in this case, they say on section 1, which looks at living in a VUCA world, they say so when I go through the article, we highlight the article based on learning outcomes, because if you check on section on unit 1.6, this is where they say on unit 1.6, the heading of the article that we need to look at is what a difference a word makes, understanding threats to performance in a VUCA world. And then the lecturer says under self-assessment, these are the things that we need to make sure that as we go through the article, we should be able to understand what is happening. And then they say, explain the acronym VUCA and illustrate with examples from your own enterprise. Then they also say, discuss complexity in the context of this article and draw a comparison with the 7 billion write-down of Woolworths Limited with their subsidiary in Australia. Now, when it comes to the second part of this particular question, where they give us that case study of Woolworths as well, I wouldn't really expect, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Reason being, typically, when the lecturer asks you questions in the exam, what the lecturer does is if they are going to be asking you questions based on a particular case study, they are obligated to give you that case study. And then based on that case study, they now ask you to apply what you've learned in the articles to to that case study that they give you. So they are not necessarily going to ask you a question in the exam and say, discuss complexity in the context of discuss complexity in the case of in the context of VUCA, and draw a comparison with the 7 billion write down of Woolworths Limited with their subsidiary in Australia as well. They're not necessarily going to do that, because typically how they ask questions in the exam, they are obligated to give you the case study, and then based on the information of the case study, they now ask you to apply what you've learned in the different articles, depending on the question. So because of this, this is the reason why I asked you guys to go through and understand Unit 1.1, which looks at ESCOM, Unit 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, those study units as well. I just ask you to go through them and not spend too much time on them, because if those are the different case studies which are trying to highlight a scenario where you are able to identify to say, so in this particular case study, should we say risk management has failed? And if it has failed, how do we attribute the failure of risk management to that particular case study? But if the question is going to be brought to you in the exam regarding the failure of risk management, they are obligated to give you the case study. Whatever company's case study that they give you, they are obligated to give you the case study. And then from the case study, they will ask you now to apply what you have learned in the different articles. So we're not necessarily going to be spending too much time on Googles and its subject in Australia. Reason being, we just need to make sure that we understand what VUCA stands for, being able to state and discuss VUCA, being able to identify each of the words. Remember, we said VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So which means we need to be able to identify these four in whatever case study that they give you. So typically that's how they would ask you questions in the exam as well. So that's what we're expected to take note of. So we are now going to be looking at the article. Are there any questions so far before we go in and delve into the article? Any questions? So looking at the article, under section 1, living in the VUCA world, they say, looking at what I've highlighted there, they say, of course, optimists see the edge a company can gain if its leaders master the accompanying challenges. For example, when it now comes to the challenges that are being put forth when you look at the VUCA acronym, they say the challenges that management are faced with in their daily operations when it comes to the VUCA acronym, they say volatility provides profit opportunity. So which means when a situation is having a lot of volatility, uh, please make sure that wherever you're sitting, you have a good network connection. Please make sure that where you're sitting, you have a good network connection as well, so that you're able to, if you have a bad network connection, you're also going to end up struggling to hear what I'm saying as well. So make sure that where you're sitting, you have a good network connection. So when it comes to volatility, they say volatility provides profit opportunity. Uncertainty is opportunity, and simplifying IT complexity is a major opportunity. And then ambiguity equals opportunity. And yet they say three significant problems exist in how leaders have employed these terms. First, their use has been cavalier. VUCA has become a cute, trendy way of saying unpredictable change. But we know that it also means a lot more, because it's not just a situation where there's unpredictable change. Though the words do have related meanings, it's the differences among them that are most valuable for leaders to understand. And second, even when pundits and leaders are sensitive to the differences in meaning, there is lack of information regarding just what it is that leaders should do in order to confront one or another of these conditions. And finally and likely, because there is a depth of actionable advice out there, too many leaders are confronting this VUCA world by simply throwing up their hands. So which means that they simply just give in to these conditions as well. So here they say, consider these three problems, and it is evident that the second and the third are not unavoidable consequences of modern business world, but rather entirely avoidable outcomes of the first. So in the paragraphs that follow, we begin by pointing out the differences between the term volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Then we discuss how to identify VUCA situations in the organizational environment and distinguish exactly which type of unpredictability is being experienced. And finally, we discuss the ways leaders need to position their companies to address these singularly. Each requires something different from the company and its leadership. So, looking at the acronym VUCA, we are going to go through all these acronyms, and then we'll come back to the table as well, where they summarize these acronyms as well, and also give us exactly what is an example of each, and also effectively how to address each one of them as well. So on section 2, they say, so what do these terms mean, and what do they mean for your company? Now, starting with volatility, they say, a volatile situation can be defined as one that is unstable or unpredictable. It does not necessarily involve complex structure, a critical lack of knowledge, or doubt about about what outcomes may result from the key events. So which means when you look at the acronym, when you look at a situation which is deemed to be a volatile situation, you need to look at it from a perspective where volatility is a volatile situation is actually the opposite of a stable situation. So which means when things are, when there's change that is expected to be encountered as well. So which means that when a situation is volatile in this case, it basically means that the situation is basically not stable, which means that the lack of stability is what is being discussed there. So which means when you have a situation which is deemed to be volatile, we are saying you know something is coming, but don't know how quickly and the magnitude in which it will happen. So that's when you're faced with a situation that is deemed to be volatile. So you know something is coming, something's going to happen, but the question is how quickly this is going to happen and to what magnitude it is going to happen. This is where what you're not sure of. So which means in that case, they say, the secret to dealing with volatility, as with any component of VUCA, is understanding the opportunities and threats inherent in the situation. So you need to understand the opportunities and threats that you are facing in that situation as well. So here they say, when volatile change is expected, the best way to prepare is to devote resources towards developing agility. And in this case, the key to agility is reliable forecasting. So which means that you need to be able to have reliable forecasting so that you are able to anticipate. They go on now. Is there any question regarding a situation which is deemed to be volatile before we move on to the other letter in the acronym? Any questions? Now, the second letter is to do with uncertainty. And here they say, uncertainty is a term used to describe a situation characterized by a lack of knowledge, not as to the cause and effect, but rather pertaining to whether a certain event is significant enough to constitute a meaningful cause. So uncertainty is not volatility. A volatile situation is one in which change is likely because you know something is coming, but that change may come quickly or at varying magnitudes. An uncertain situation, on the other hand, is not so volatile. In fact, there may be no change. There may be no change inherent at all. Because uncertainty exists in the lack of adequate information, addressing it simply involves obtaining information. So investment here entails methods of collecting, interpreting, and sharing information. Uncertainty can be solved structurally by devoting more resources to boundary spanning activities. That is moving beyond existing networks, data sources, and analysis processes to gather information from new partners and look at it differently. So information networks are created from many different sources, both inside and outside the firm. So which means when you are faced with uncertainty here, we are saying when you are faced with a situation where there's uncertainty, we are saying you don't know if something is going to happen or not. The best way to deal with such is gathering information as much as possible on a continuous basis and data processing. So remember we said when a situation is volatile, you know something is going to happen, but what you don't know is what is the magnitude and how quickly is it going to happen. That's when you're faced with the situation that is what? Volatile. When you're faced with a situation where there's uncertainty, the key thing there is you don't know if something is going to happen or not. So you don't know whether something is going to happen or not. So how do you now prepare yourself? You need to make sure that you gather as much information as possible. So the more information you have, the more prepared, the more you're able to now see exactly, the more information you have, the less the uncertainty there, because you already know exactly from the different variables that can also cause something to happen as well. You already know what is happening with those variables so that you have what? Those early warning signs. So here they say, the principle is well illustrated by the aftermath of the 2001 US terror attacks. And here they say, when you look at what happened in September 11, 2001, remember this is where the Twin Towers were bombed, and there was also the Pentagon that was also not bombed, but the aeroplanes went through, and also the same happened with the aeroplane crashing into the Pentagon as well, right? So which means after 2001, America went on to try as much as possible using the Central Intelligence Agency and working with other arms as well as other partners across the world, where the National Security Agency in America was also contributing towards that, and also sharing information with the five arms, which is basically the combination of other different countries as well, including MI6. So which means the idea was to avoid having to be dealing with the situation of uncertainty. Let's rather gather as much information as possible so that we already know exactly who is likely going to try to cause another terrorist attack to us. So which means they gathered as much information as possible. Now, here they also go on to say, to again reinforce distinction between the different components of VUCA. we note that the post 9/11 situation was not necessarily volatile. The core issue facing the world's governments was not a lack of stability or predictability. Rather, government leaders realized that the success of the attacks on the World Trade Center might encourage other terrorists to create similar plots. So this is how you are able to identify a situation of uncertainty, and ideally, this is how you need to deal with a situation of uncertainty that if you face a situation of uncertainty. Are we on the same page? Any questions? Now, the next letter in the VUCA acronym represents complexity. Now they say a complex situation is characterized by many interconnected parts. Again, this is distinct from volatile or uncertain situation. Now, with complexity, they say, instead, the most straightforward way for an organization to address complexity is to simplify the situation by adopting a structure that mirrors that of the environment. Research has consistently shown organizations that adapt themselves to match environmental change perform at substantively high levels, whereas firms that maintain past structures and processes in the face of a changing business environment are less effective. So in the most obvious example, as a small informal organization grows, it is expected that formal departments will appear to address what has become too much for a single person to handle. So which means in this case, uh, 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 so which means when an organization is growing, right? Let's say, for example, an organization starts off with operations as a where when one starts a company as the founder of the company, in most cases, as one starts that company, you find that let's say, for example, someone starts a small business where they go into they buy a truck and do deliveries, right? Maybe you might find that at initial phase, the owner of the business is also the driver, is also the accountant, is also the operations manager, is also basically everything, is also involved in marketing as well. But now, as the fleet grows and the business grows as well, you find that at some point, that one owner of the business is not going to be in a position where they are able to think strategically, do the accounting, do this and that. Now they are having a fleet of 5 trucks, which means they're not able to drive all these 5 trucks by themselves. So what are they going to do? They're now going to have to delegate. So which means as the business grows, it means that there is need, as the business grows, is becoming a more complex organization. It's becoming a lot more complex because there's a lot more responsibilities involved in each of those functions. So which means as the business grows from a small organization into a bigger organization, for example, as an example of a truck where there's a lot more trucks involved, there are so many other issues. There's need for a mechanic, there's need for this and that as well. It means that there's need for that organization now to be restructured in such a way that there's a separate finance department, there's an operations department, there's a marketing department, there's a human resource functions, which are also in this case, which means that there are so many different departments that are now having to be established to deal with this complex with this organization that has grown in complexity. So here they say finance, operations, marketing, and human resources functions are established so that each part of the organization addresses something in which it has expertise. So as an organization grows, there are so many, the relationship between the different functions of the organizations are becoming a lot more complicated because there's a lot of variables that are involved when it comes to their interrelationships. And because of this, it means that there is need for specialization in each and every of those functions as well. So that's ideally how one deals with complexity in an organization. So I'm not going to go through the case study where they talk about the case of Reeds, which is discussed here. But in short, they say his firm's growth into so many new markets creates a complexity that might best be resolved by moving to a more geographically based organizational structure such that different branches of the company are able to specialize in understanding and exploiting market regulations and idiosyncrasies as well. So which means in this case, they are saying if your organization, as your organization is growing, where, for example, you start off having a branch or your main branch in Gauteng, maybe in Joburg, you find that maybe now you have operations in Port Elizabeth, now you have operations in Cape Town. Now you have operations in Gaborone, Botswana as well. It basically means that there is need for there to be for the functions there to be based on what geographical locations. So which means if you have your branch or if you have your branch in Botswana as well, ideally you would also want to have those different functions within that particular branch as well, so that it's able to meet the complexity of the environment that it's operating in, which is usually unique to the other different branches as well. So is there any question regarding complexity before we move on to ambiguity, which is the last one? Any questions? Now, looking at ambiguity, which is the last letter in the acronym, they say ambiguity characterizes a situation where there is doubt about the nature of cause and effect relationship. So here, the lack of understanding as to what will happen next and that lack of understanding is distinct from uncertainty. In a merely uncertain situation, you have a good idea of what causes what. An ambiguous situation, on the other hand, typically revolves around a wholly new product, market, innovation, or opportunity. An ambiguous situation is more challenging because of the newness. There is little historical precedent for determining the outcomes of new causes, of certain causes or course of action. So in the case of ambiguity, we believe the key to success is experimentation, not slack resources, information gathering, or restructurization. So in this case, when you are faced with a situation where there is ambiguity, it means that it's not a situation that is clear. So it's not a situation that is clear. So there is no clarity on the cause and effect relationship. So there is no clarity on the nature of cause and effect relationship. So as a final thought, now looking at this, to understand this better, the author summarized these relationships. The author summarizes these letters in the acronym in table 1. And it's we need to go through it because it makes our lives a lot easier, because it gives us the breakdown of these relationships and exactly give us an example and how to deal with it as well. And also gives us the keywords that we need to be looking out for when we are looking at being able to identify and distinguishing the different scenarios. Now, when a scenario is having volatility, in the table, they say, so what it is. So when a situation facing that you're facing is having volatility, they say there is a relatively unstable change. Information is available and the situation is understandable. But change is frequent and sometimes unpredictable. So remember, when you said change is frequent, it is to do with the timing, because you don't know exactly when is it going to happen. And also, it's also unpredictable. Now, as an example of a situation that is volatile, they say commodity pricing is often quite volatile. Jet fuel costs, for instance, have been quite volatile in the 21st century. Now, when it comes to how to effectively address a situation where you are facing volatility, they say agility is key to coping with volatility. So resources should be aggressively directed towards building strength and creating the potential for future flexibility. So which means when you're faced with a situation of volatility, the key thing there to understand is to do with stability. Is this situation a stable situation or is it an unstable situation? If it's an unstable situation, then you're facing a situation of volatility. So which means with the situation of volatility, change is frequent and sometimes it can be unpredictable. So which means the key word to understand here is when you're faced with the situation of volatility, you're having a situation that is unstable and change is frequent and sometimes unpredictable. So that's what you need to look out for to attribute to a situation to be described as a volatile situation. How to address a volatile situation, the key word there is agility. You need to make sure that you are agile enough to be able to meet these frequent and sometimes unpredictable changes. When a situation is described as uncertain, they say A lack of knowledge as to whether an event will have meaningful ramifications. So the cause and effect are understood, but it is unknown if an event will create significant change. So which means when you are faced with a situation of uncertainty, this is basically uncertainty is the opposite of a situation that is described as a predictable situation or a situation which is certain. So it's the opposite of that. So which means when your situation that you're facing is unpredictable, then it means that you are facing a situation of uncertainty. Remember here, you know the cause and effect relationships. You know the cause, the cause and effect of the relationships of the situation. But what you don't know is exactly what if this event is going to cause what? A significant change. So this event is deemed to be unpredictable. So as an example of uncertainty situation, a situation where you are facing uncertainty, they say anti-terrorism initiatives are generally plagued with uncertainty. We understand many causes of terrorism, but not exactly when and how they could spur attacks. Now, if you're faced with a situation of uncertainty, the key way or how to effectively address a situation of uncertainty, the key word there is information. So you need to get as much information as possible to address a situation where you are facing uncertainty. So here they say information is critical to reducing uncertainty. Firms should move beyond existing information sources to both gather new data and consider it from new perspective. So that's when you are facing a situation of uncertainty. The next letter in the acronym deals with complexity, and in describing what a situation that is deemed to be complex. Now, they say many interconnected parts forming an elaborate network of information and procedures, often multiform, convoluted, but not necessarily involving change. So which means when you're facing a situation of complexity, something complex is the opposite. The word complex is the opposite of a situation that is deemed to be simple and something that is linear, because you already know exactly the sequence in which things are connected. So with complexity, remember we said it's the opposite of the word simple, is the opposite of the word linear, because with a situation that is complex, there are so many different variables that you are having to take into account. Like for example, in the example that I gave you of a tracking business, as the business organization grows, there is a lot of other information that needs to be processed at the same time, such that when the business is small, when the founder of the business starts off with one track, usually they are the driver, they are everything, right? But as the organization grows, there is information that is coming in that needs to be processed at the same time. So what does one do? It basically means that there is now need to have separate functions with people specializing in those functions as well. So you need a finance department, you need a marketing departments, you need a manufacturing department if you're manufacturing something, you need an operations department and sales department and so forth. So which means an example that they give us here of a situation that is deemed to be complex, they say moving into foreign markets is frequently complex. Doing business in new countries often involves navigating a complex web of tariffs, laws, regulations, and logistics issues. So all these issues need to be addressed at the same time. And because of this, it means that as you move into a new market, whether it's a foreign market or even a domestic market as well, as you move into a new market, there's a lot of information that needs to be processed at the same time. And because of this, it means that you are dealing with a situation of complexity. Now, how to address a complex situation? The key word there is restructuring your organization. So which means here, they say internal company operations. So you need to restructuring internal company operations to match the external complexity is the most effective and efficient way to address it. Remember, we're talking about addressing what? A situation of complexity. So as I say, firms should attempt to match their own operations and processes to mirror environmental complexities. So which means as the business environment becomes more and more complex that they're operating in, the best way to deal with complexity is to restructure the organizations to mirror and match the needs of those complexities as well. The next letter in the acronym that they summarize on this table is ambiguity. They say a lack of knowledge as to the basic rules of the game. Cause and effect are not understood, and there is no precedent for making predictions as to what to expect. So the word ambiguity, when something is ambiguous, the opposite of a situation of the word ambiguous is clear. So there is no clarity on exactly what you're dealing with. So the situation that you're facing there is no clarity on what you're dealing with. So the word, the opposite of ambiguous would be clear. So which means in the situation you're faced with there's no clarity when it comes to the cause and effect relationships. So here they say, as an example, the transition from print to digital media has been very ambiguous. Companies are still learning how customers will access and experience data and entertainment given new technologies. And we see this now as well, where we are seeing a rapid growth in artificial intelligence as well. So there's we're seeing this now when you look at the rapid growth in artificial intelligence. So which means as an organization, the question becomes, so how are you going to deal with this situation where you have a rapid growth in artificial intelligence? We have seen this quite a lot on social media as well, where now people are interacting. If you're on Twitter, we see people interacting with Grok, asking questions and having conversations with Grok as well. Now the question becomes, as an organization, you there's a lot of uncertainty that there's a lot of ambiguity that you're going to be dealing with now regarding exactly, so what does it mean when it comes to these developments which are being brought forth by the progress in artificial intelligence? And many organizations, they don't really understand the basic rules of the game when it comes to how to handle artificial intelligence. So which means, in this case, you will need now to learn more when it comes to how you can be able to utilize and apply artificial intelligence as well. So which means you now need to play around with these different artificial intelligent tools so that you can see exactly how it can be able to be of use to you. So here, to deal with a situation of ambiguity, they say how to effectively address ambiguity. They say experimentation is necessary for reducing ambiguity. Only through intelligent experimentation can firm leaders determine what strategies are and are not beneficial in situations where the former rules of business no longer apply. So there is need for experimentation, because without experimentation, you are not going to be able to keep up as well and be and remaining competitive, especially when you look at the issue of artificial intelligence as well. We see this quite a lot where the now people are able to create websites using artificial intelligence. And now we see when you look at what is happening with Tesla as well, they're now having those Tesla trucks where they're able to transport goods uh, using those trucks. And if you look at the amount of intelligence that is also coming in as well, I wouldn't be surprised that in the next 5 years, we'll be having autonomous trucks that are able to transport goods and moving by themselves, where you just program the destination of where you want the truck to go, and the truck will go by itself, which means now, how are you able to now deal with all these changes in the basic rules of the game? Because there is change that is coming when it comes to how companies do business. And this use and this advancement in artificial intelligence as well is also creating a lot of ambiguity in the operations, because the last thing that you want is a situation where you are becoming obsolete. We have seen this quite a lot. If you look at the advancements in technology as well, where previously, if you still remember 15, 20 years ago, Nokia used to dominate the market, or even 30 years ago, Nokia used to dominate the market. But um, when they were using that other platform, I forgot the name of the platform. But now, when they introduced the Android platform as well, Nokia got left behind, and other companies also took over the market share of Nokia. And we saw this when it comes to the other phone manufacturer, BlackBerry, and even BlackBerry as well. They got lost. They got left behind as well, because the rules of the game basically was changing. And as the game was changing there, it basically means that without experimentation and getting and learning more about the changes of the rules of the game as well. What happened? It basically meant that even BlackBerry got left behind and other companies came in. We know the story of Samsung. We know the story of Apple as well. So these are the 4 letters in the acronym of VUCA. Are there any questions? Are there any questions regarding the acronym VUCA? Any questions? Now, on the last section of the article, in final thoughts, the author says, globalization has created opportunities with one hand as it has introduced threats with the other. The stubborn global recession has blunted repeated bursts of optimism for the return to a path of prosperity. Layer on the challenge of digesting technological advancements that impact industry, as well as the consequences of demographic shifts in the workforce. And there can be little doubt that leaders have their hands full. So when it comes to questions in the exam, like what I said, the typical type of questions you would expect to encounter in the exam when it comes to this. Typically, the typical type of questions would expect to encounter in the exam. I'll just highlight an example of question you'd encounter in the exam. So as a long question, as a long structured question, I'm not going to go through these questions because remember, we already have this, we have already covered this. We do cover this in the exams. The past question papers, the questions are there, the answers are there as well. So here they say, as a typical question that you would expect to encounter, remember I said, here they're saying, describe the elements of VUCA, right? So they can ask you to describe the elements of VUCA, and that's 8 marks. So which means if they ask you to describe the elements of VUCA, it means you are just being asked to discuss volatility, what it is, and so you are basically asked to discuss volatility, what it is, and then you're asked to discuss uncertainty, what it is, and what you're asked to discuss complexity and what it is, and you're also asked to discuss ambiguity and what it is as well. Then the second part of the question, they say, describe the risk mitigation strategy for each element. Now, when it comes to the risk mitigation strategy there, this is the section where they say how to effectively address each one of them. So which means in general, the key, they are now looking for the keywords here to say agility, information, restructuring, experimentation as ways that you can use to address these as well. Now, another typical type of question that they can ask you regarding VUCA as well. Which question was it? Another typical type of question that they can ask you in the exam regarding VUCA is where they can give you a case study, and then based on that case study, they can now ask you to describe the different elements relating to VUCA as well. Looking for which question was it? Oh, another typical question that they can ask you in the exam. Yeah. So another typical type of question that they can ask you in the exam is where they can give you, if you check in the Jan-Feb 2026, the Jan-Feb 2026 the Jan-Feb 2026 paper. So if you check in the Jan-Feb 2026 paper, here they give us a short case study regarding the G20, and based on the short case study of the information that they give us regarding the G20, they now ask us to address the issues of the VUCA acronym as well, and issues related to the VUCA acronym as well. So those are the type of, or typical type of questions where they now say, for example, based on this case study, is it a situation of volatility? Is it a situation of uncertainty? Is it a situation of complexity? Or is it a situation of what? Ambiguity that the organization is facing, or that is being discussed in this case study as well. So those are the typical type of questions that you would expect to be asked in the exam. So because of this, please make sure that you are able to know and understand each letter of the acronym, and you should be able to distinguish each of those situations. Remember, there are those keywords that we're looking at when we're trying to distinguish, to say, how do we identify a situation of volatility? How do we identify a situation of uncertainty? How do we identify a situation of complexity or ambiguity as well? So which means you should be able to identify those different situations depending on information given in this case study. So it's like what I was saying when it comes to the exam. If they give you a case study, you should not necessarily expect that that case study is exactly going to be the one that they give you in the articles. If they're going to be asking you about a certain concept and they give you a case study, they can pick any case study, but they have to give you information regarding that case study, so that from that case study, you are able to apply what you have learned into the case study as well. Like, for example, application of what you've learned in the case study, for example, is being able to identify, to say, this situation that is being described, is it a situation of volatility? Is it a situation of uncertainty? Is it a situation of complexity? And is it a situation of ambiguity as well? So which means you must go back to the article and look for the keywords that describe those different situations for you to be able to distinguish those situations. And once you distinguish those situations, you now need to know exactly how do you now remedy or effectively remedy those situations as well. Are we on the same page? Any questions? Anyone lost? All right, can you take a 10 minutes break until 9:40? A 10 minutes break until 9:40. Then at 9:40, we look at unit 2.1. So can you take a 10 minutes break until 9:40? Then at 9:40, we look at unit 2.1.